Typhoon Goni, known in the Philippines as Super Typhoon Rolly, was an extremely powerful tropical cyclone that made landfall as a Category 5 equivalent super typhoon on Catanduanes in the Philippines and became the strongest landfalling tropical cyclone on record by 1-minute winds, eclipsing the previous record held by Haiyan and Meranti. The 19th named storm, 9th typhoon, and second super typhoon of the 2020 Pacific typhoon season, Goni originated as a tropical depression south of Guam on October 26. It was then named as Tropical Storm Goni on October 27. On the next day, Goni explosively intensified over the Philippine Sea, becoming a Category 5 equivalent super typhoon on October 30. Goni maintained Category 5 strength for over a day, before making landfall on Catanduanes at peak intensity, with 10-minute sustained winds of 220 km per hour, 140 miles per hour, 1-minute sustained winds of 315 km per hour, 195 miles per hour, with a minimum central pressure of 905 hectopascals, mbar, 26.72 inches of mercury. It was the strongest tropical cyclone observed worldwide thus far in 2020 and one of the most intense tropical cyclones on record. 2. Following its first landfall, Goni rapidly weakened while it moved over the Philippines. The storm brought severe flash flooding to Legazpi, as well as lahar flow from the nearby Mayon volcano. There were widespread power outages as well as damaged power and transmission lines in Bicol. Crops were also heavily damaged. Over 390,000 out of 1 million evacuated individuals have been displaced in the region. Due to the extreme wind speed of the typhoon, 2 evacuation shelters had their roofing lost. Debris and lahars had also blocked various roads, as well as rendering the Basud Bridge impassable. In all, the typhoon killed at least 25 people and caused at least $17.9 billion, $369 million worth of damage. 3. The COVID-19 pandemic has also been a concern for people in evacuation centers. 4. After Goni moved into the West Philippine Sea, it subsequently weakened into a tropical storm. It started to move generally westward towards Vietnam. It eventually reached the country late on November 5 as a tropical depression, bringing heavy rain and gusty winds. International relief from the United Nations as well as several countries followed soon after the typhoon moved away from the Philippines. 5. Rolly will be retired and will be replaced with a new name for a future typhoon season. After Typhoon Malave devastated the Philippines, the Japan Meteorological Agency, JMA, announced the formation of a new tropical depression in the Pacific Ocean, west of the Mariana Islands, on October 27. 6. Given its proximity to the Philippine Area of Responsibility, PAR, along with its westward forecasted track, the Philippine Atmospheric, Geophysical, and Astronomical Services Administration, PAGASA, also began issuing advisories on the newly formed system. 7. By into the next day, the Joint Typhoon Warning Center, JTWC, had also followed and upgraded the system into a tropical depression. 8. The storm had good outflow and structure as it approached the PAR. 9. As the system continued tracking westward under favorable conditions in the Pacific Ocean, the JMA and JTWC upgraded the system into a tropical storm, with the JMA assigning the name Goni to the intensifying system. 10, 11, 12. The PAGASA followed with an upgrade to a severe tropical storm a few hours later. 13. Due to the warm waters surrounding the storm, the system underwent rapid intensification and became a typhoon on October 29. 14-15. On October 29, at 9:30 UTC, Goni entered the PAR and was named Rolly by the PAGASA. 16. Early on the following day, the system was declared a super typhoon by the JTWC a few hours later, the second super typhoon of the season, before further intensifying into the first Category 5 equivalent super typhoon of the season by 6 o'clock UTC on October 30. 17. After undergoing a brief eyewall replacement cycle on October 31, which is a typical process for a storm of such high intensity. 18. It resumed intensifying, with the JTWC, JMA, and Satellite Analysis Branch 19, all assessing Dvorak technique T numbers of 8.0, the highest on the scale. On this basis, the JTWC estimated 1-minute sustained winds of 315 km per hour, 195 miles per hour, tying with Haiyan in 2013 and Meranti in 2016 as the highest reliably estimated in the Eastern Hemisphere. Meanwhile, the JMMA estimated a central barometric pressure of 905 hectopascals, mbar, 26.72 inches of mercury, for the storm. 2021-22. At 1800 hours UTC, 2 o'clock PHT November 1, hours before Goni's first landfall, Pagasa upgraded Goni into a super typhoon. This was the second time that the Pagasa declared a system as a super typhoon since its introduction of the revised public storm warning signals, the first being Haiyan in 2016. This is also the second time that the highest tropical cyclone wind signal, signal number 5, was raised in the Philippines. At 2050 UTC on October 31, Goni made landfall in Bato, Catanduanes, Philippines, at peak intensity, as a Category 5 equivalent super typhoon. 23-24, the JMA and Pagasa both reported 10-minute sustained winds of 220 km per hour, 140 miles per hour 25, and 225 km per hour, 140 miles per hour, respectively. 23. By 1-minute sustained winds, this made Goni the strongest recorded tropical cyclone to ever make landfall anywhere in the world. 2026, Goni made additional landfalls in Tiwi, Albay at 23:20 UTC and San Narciso, Quezon at 4 o'clock UTC, on November 1. 27-28, Goni then made its fourth and final landfall in the Philippines in Lobo, Batangas at 9:30 UTC. 29, interaction with land, plus an increase in wind shear caused Goni to rapidly weaken and it emerged over the West Philippine Sea as a minimal tropical storm. 30-31. Before exiting the PAR, Goni slightly intensified, but further development was hampered by unfavorable conditions. 32-33, the system left the PAR at 12 o'clock UTC, 8 o'clock PHT, on November 3. 34. Goni then lingered over the South China Sea, with its intensity ranging from 40 to 45 miles per hour before briefly weakening again into a 40 miles per hour tropical storm. Goni's convection decoupled from its low-level circulation as a result of anticyclonic shear generated by the nearby tropical storm Haiyan, from northern Luzon. Goni's trough then brought rain and more flooding to an already rain-stricken Vietnam from previous Linfa, Nangka, Ophel and Malave which had all struck a few weeks earlier. Citation needed. The Bicol Regional Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council, RDRRMC, issued a no-sail policy that was put in place on October 29. 35. The Philippine Coast Guard stopped giving travel permits to sea vessels bound for the Polillo Island. 36. On October 30 at 8 o'clock PHT, 0 o'clock UTC, authorities of Quezon placed the province in red alert in preparation for the storm, which requires operation and monitoring teams to be available at all times as the typhoon worsens. At the same time, the Camarines Norte Incident Management Team began evacuating 35,000 families, around 159,000 people, from high-risk areas, including coastal villages inside the province's bayside capital, Dayat. 37. On the same day, the NDRRMC raised a nationwide red alert in preparation for the storm's impact. 38. The Research Institute for Tropical Medicine, one of the largest COVID-19 sample testing laboratories in the country, announced a temporary suspension of operations on November 1 and 2 in order to mitigate damage to their building and equipment. 37. As the typhoon neared the country, the Philippine Institute of Volcanology and Seismology had issued advisories warning of possible lahar contamination of nearby rivers and drainage areas near Mount Pinatubo, the Mayon volcano, and the Taal volcano. 39-40. On the morning of the October 31, less than 24 hours before the typhoon made landfall, Pagasa raised a signal number 3 tropical cyclone warning signal for Catanduanes, with the same signal being raised for the northeastern portions of both Albay and Camarines Sur a few hours later. 41-42, local governments across Camarines Sur began forced evacuations, with the province's Provincial Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council expecting the evacuation of 20,000 families before noon. 43. By noon, the Camarines Norte government had evacuated 6,645 individuals from 75 villages out of a planned 159,000. 44. Food packs worth 8.3 million, non-food items worth 26.42 million, and 3 million in standby funds were prepared in the Bicol region by the Department of Social Welfare and Development, together with local disaster response agencies. Evacuation centers in Aurora were also prepared, with some school buildings designated for use as shelters. 45-46. In Metro Manila, mayors of the constituent cities have begun their own preparations for the upcoming typhoon, such as halting construction and ordering the dismantling of tents and other outdoor structures. The Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Office of Manila has prepared rescue boats for potential rescue operations. 46.